Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Plains on the Prairie podcast. I'm Max.
And I'm Sam.
And today we are on to episode 2 of our North Dakota Aces series. If you didn't catch it last week, maybe not every week, but we're going to try to focus on a different North Dakota ace every other week or so if we don't have a big event coming up. And Sam, I know you did a ton of research on today's ace. Do you want to talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, so we'll be shifting over from Western Europe over to the Pacific now. So we'll be talking about Francis Register, who had 7 confirmed kills from Bismarck, North Dakota. So this is we talked about this in the last episode about how diverse this group of 9 pilots is. For only being 9 pilots, it's very spread on the type of action they saw and what theater, what time of the war. So it's
I remember from talking before this, we started rolling. I'm curious how many of these pilots were in the service before Pearl Harbor.
A lot of the early war pilots were like Coral Sea, Guadalcanal, Midway. They were all post Pearl Harbor grads.
Yeah.
So Register, he was born on November 15th, 1917 in Bismarck. So yeah, he was a little on the older side by the time the war started. He was 24, old for the time.
Yeah, old for the time.
So yeah, he's 24 when he joined up, or not even 24, 23 when he joined up in February 1941. Did his training at Pensacola like pretty much everybody else in the Navy did. And actually got his wings 5 days after Pearl Harbor on the 12th.
Really?
Yep, 1941. Wow. So he saw some of those yellow wings.
Yeah.
To think that,
your favorite.
Yeah, getting me going here.
So Sam, quick question. So he didn't have any flying experience prior to?
Nothing as far as I gathered. I did find while researching here a pretty extensive amount of research. So I'll be referencing his wartime diary. It's not like a full encompassing, but he does mostly talk about his training and all of his time at Guadalcanal at Henderson Field. So it's a really, really good read. I highly recommend checking out the link we'll post in the description of this, and
the audience know.
And we'll share the link on Facebook as well individually, because it's a cool story and it really humanizes the effect of the war. A lot of people like to read about just the overviews and stuff, which is fine. I do it myself. But like we were talking before the podcast, those of you who listen know us, I'm quite the reader. Every other book I read is a memoir, and for every overview or insight, basically, on the macro scale of the war. So I like to see these humanizing stories in this. And so I'll be referencing his time in there a lot while sifting through, research material. I found a Prairie Public article, and in that Prairie Public article, they referenced a book. So I did order a book that's a biography of Register. So maybe we'll part 2 this or something, or we'll include it some other time, as I'll probably find a good wealth of information.
Absolutely.
It'll be way in depth. But today this will plenty suffice. Our last episode is 25 minutes. So we'll see how many tangents we get on here.
Hopefully a couple. I feel like
you guys don't mind, these will be slightly longer than our short format. I mean, they won't be an hour long, but a little bit more hardy.
The one that you want to sit down and just kind of focus on. Like, I know we're going to be getting into Sam's bread and butter here with the history of a couple of different early Navy squadrons and some of those, as we mentioned earlier, some of those yellow wings that Sam absolutely loves. So you're definitely not going to want to miss this one. But
right. Yeah.
Let's get back to it here. So Register, you said he got his wings 5 days after Pearl Harbor?
Yeah. So he was shifting through that training right as the war clouds are forming. I mean, pre-U.S. involvement in the war, Churchill and many others were like, hey, can you guys, we're lend-leasing and all that, but we were inching closer and closer. We were kind of that active one-sided neutrality in a way.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call us completely neutral. I mean, people may argue that, but in reality, we weren't. We were shifting towards that focus. So there was an increased recruitment in 40-41 for sure. But yeah, he was initially assigned to VF3 and then VF6. We'll talk a little bit more about the squadron histories later on. A little bit of confusing history there that we'll clear up in a little bit between the two numbers. primarily he was aboard the USS Saratoga and Enterprise during his combat times. And he mostly saw action over the Solomons, Guadalcanal, being based as part of the Cactus Air Force in Guadalcanal. So
Cool.
The Cactus Air Force was a contingent on Henderson Field. So just a hopefully brief overview of Guadalcanal. So basically, it was Japanese held initially. The Pacific campaign itself was an island hopping campaign. It was, we're going to bypass certain islands such as Rabaul and others, and kind of strike the more strategic kind of. Not every single island is going to be liberated, but hopefully the attrition is high enough for the Japanese, which in the end it did work, right? I mean, we're all speaking English today, and Japan's our ally now, so exactly. it all worked anyways. So spoiler alert there, but anyways, there was a small contingent of Japanese troops there, and they were scouting out an airfield. They cleared a path, and it was a very rugged strip at first. What turned into Henderson Field, though, when the U.S. landed, they had air, fighter sweeps, ground attack. They did really well in the first couple of days of Guadalcanal on the landings. They supported it. The supply train was a little iffy for the troops, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But they did well at the beginning and well enough to start basing Marine and naval fighter squadrons on Henderson. So yes, he was at first aboard the Saratoga and Enterprise. Enterprise took some hits and ended up having to go back for repairs back east towards the United States. And he ended up being on Cactus for a long time.
Yeah. So can you mention real quick, where does the name Cactus Air Force come from?
So Cactus was the code name for Guadalcanal, for Henderson.
Gotcha.
And Guadalcanal, for the most part, was just nicknamed Cactus. We had code words for a lot of different targets and objectives back in the day to try to fool, the translators and stuff and decoders. But yeah, Cactus is Guadalcanal.
Gotcha.
So it just ended up catching on as the Cactus Air Force.
Has a nice ring to it.
Yeah, it does. A lot of cacti in the Pacific, South Pacific. But yeah, he was initially stationed there, or was most of the info we're going to cover today is Guadalcanal.
Gotcha.
And the landing started in early August. August 7th, I believe, was the first day of Guadalcanal in 1942. And his first victory came a few weeks later on August 24th, 1942, where he shot down a Zero. So a Wildcat versus a Zero. So we can talk a little bit about that if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please.
So the Wildcat is not the most maneuverable plane. The Zero,
it's the Hellcat, or excuse me, the Wildcat is more rugged,
self-sealing fuel tanks.
Yeah.
Everything the Zero was not. So it all boiled down to the pilot. You couldn't get into a turning fight with the Zero, just like pretty much any other American fighter at the time. P-40s, P-39s, all those, they couldn't really get involved with a dogfight.
So this Zero that he was engaging, I don't know if you found it in your research. Would it have been from a Japanese land-based squadron, or would this have been probably a carrier-based Zero?
It was a land-based Zero from, I believe, either Rabaul or Bougainville.
Gotcha.
So yeah, they were all land-based contingents at the beginning of the campaign, and then a couple of their carriers kind of came south from Truk, one of their major Central Pacific bases. But his first kill came then, and then later on he became North Dakota's first ace a little over a month later on September 27th. He shot down 4 Japanese aircraft
in a day.
So almost as good as Bloomer.
I was gonna say, what is it with these North Dakota aces and almost getting
and
aces in a day?
And this isn't dogging the Western front of Europe or anything, not showing any bias here, but at this time in the war, it wasn't won at all. The U.S. was living in fear still, because that Pearl Harbor wound was very fresh, and we were just getting our footing in the Pacific. Air superiority was not ours. Mm-hmm. So it's just impressive, especially considering just the supply issues and whatnot.
I was going to say another thing that we tend to forget or maybe overlook, because I think the United States was so enamored by the kamikaze that we thought, why would we sacrifice, or why would a pilot sacrifice their life? We have to remember that, this is 1945. In 1942, before all those tactics, the Japanese had almost a decade of combat under their belts in China.
Right. Starting with Manchuria in 31. And yeah, they were hardened. They had some
of those
experienced
Japanese pilots had seen almost a decade of combat in the air. So
some of them very well could have. Yeah. At least from 1937 in the Sino-Japanese War. Yeah, it's insane. But yeah, the Japanese at that time were just seen as, they swept across, Southeast Asia into all the islands, took over Singapore, Java, Sumatra, Malaya, all those in the matter of 6 months. And it's
crazy
that, they attacked Darwin, Australia, not too long before the Guadalcanal landings. It wasn't a one war at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had Midway turned the tide a little bit. We had Coral Sea a little earlier on that made us feel good. But that war was still, it was still two-sided.
War.
Yep. So reading through his diary entries was really interesting. Like I said, it really humanized the aspect of Guadalcanal.
Yeah.
I'm reading another book about Guadalcanal called Fighter Squadron at Guadalcanal, about the Marines right now, about VMF 212. And it also kind of shows that humanizing factor. But
absolutely. Were there any like blurbs or anything from this diary that really stuck out with you about the fighting on Guadalcanal?
How it was put was, as the entries went on, as he racked up his kills, he was proud of what he did. He wasn't cocky. I didn't get a lick of cockiness out of him. It was more, I'm doing my job. My friends are here. I'm protecting my friends. What I got from it was, consistently was, that sobering aspect of combat where he's talking about, okay, his friend got in an accident or got shot down and lost them. Or there's other good ones where they had a Grumman Duck, amphib biplane there. And that was used to pick up down survivors. And he would constantly volunteer for those patrols to help his down friends and other squadron mates to escort. Oh, he would escort the duck, and awesome. They would help fly those patrols in order to just look as well while escorting. This man flew almost every day, and it was just insane to see that, because he, you'll read in his excerpts here, he's just wearing out. You can just tell by the language. We're not seeing him in that point, but people routinely lost 30 plus pounds because the supply chain was an issue there. Food wasn't coming in. Japanese were harassing daily. So, things had to be shipped at night. The Japanese were landing thousands of troops a week on Guadalcanal. They were taking off from an active war zone. Exactly. Within miles. They held a very small perimeter. And the supply chain was nothing. And it was a war of attrition on a micro scale. And it was just a hard fought battle, not from the Japanese perspective just alone, but they were hungry. They were getting sick. Their malaria was an issue. In his diary, I think there's 2 or 3 times where he's in the hospital from just dizzy spells and just being worn out. So it's just the people on Guadalcanal, not, the pilots alone did a lot, but, the Marines, just imagine being a ground troop there.
Yeah.
But I guess to answer your question in the long form here, one thing that stuck out for me, but was basically how he was tired, but Marines, that he ran into were thanking him. The pilots provided morale boosts for the ground troops. Absolutely. And he basically, in his own words, said, "This is what I'm here for." I mean, he's here to serve his country, but seeing that and reading that just kind of kind of sat with me pretty
Absolutely.
well.
And you talking about that, I can see it. It's that's something that's super passionate for you, Sam. And the more I think about it, we had guys like Register, right, flying in these missions on Guadalcanal. The 164th Infantry Regiment of the North Dakota Army National Guard was the first Army unit to go into combat against the Japanese, or to any Axis powers at that point. So, it's the Battle of Guadalcanal shouldn't be underestimated in the annals of North Dakota history.
No.
North Dakota blood has been spilled there. Guys like Register and the men of the 164th, they put their heart and soul into that combat. And I mean, just by the way you're describing it, it's almost making me bring to tears just how miserable those combat conditions were.
And it was all for a great cause. I mean, it's just, but yeah, he gave a lot. He had a lot of mechanical issues that could have brought him down. He had one engine failure where he was able to basically bring it back into the Henderson, but it's just really cool to hear an individual story. I've read plenty of overview accounts recently on Guadalcanal. This one I'm reading right now, I'm only 30, 40 pages through, but it feels like I'm reading his diary.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so he actually on October 1st, a few days after his 4-kill day, none other than Nimitz flew in on an R4D transport to see the conditions and stuff, which probably wasn't
miserable.
Probably was very shocked by it alone. But he personally awarded Register with the Distinguished Flying Cross. And he was also up for nomination for the Navy Cross, but I couldn't find anything up on that. But just to be in front of Nimitz, the commander of the
Supreme Commander of the Pacific.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
Wow. From Bismarck, North Dakota.
Yep, and not to mention he was the first ace of North Dakota.
That is true.
Yep.
Yes.
And so 9/27/42. This is the earliest combat of any of the people we'll cover.
1942. To put that into perspective, that's what, May 1942. That's what, 5 months, 6 months after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and
how quickly the United States got into combat.
And the ball rolling really fast. Yeah. I mean, Torch was happening that summer as well over in the Mediterranean. And
absolutely.
It's just, it's crazy. And then unfortunately in 1943, I guess to backtrack here for a second, as I said, he was getting very weak, just like many other pilots, just the constant, 2 months of flying. It wears down on you. I mean, I'm a professional pilot myself, and I get tired after 2 weeks of everyday flying, but I'm not in combat, right? So it's just I could just about imagine what they went through. Just
miserable.
And then just to cap that off, poor sleep, poor health,
poor food,
losing friends. It's just
everything's
the weight of the world's on them.
Exactly.
And it's amazing he lasted 2 months. So then just from his health standpoint, they grounded him on, no more than 10 days after his award. And he ended up going back on leave back to the States, got to see his wife. He mentions his wife a lot in that diary, and that really hits you too, just finding out what happened to him. And unfortunately, after a while, he ended up getting transferred to the Aleutian Campaign. And the Aleutian Campaign is very, very well known by World War II historians about the weather. The Aleutian Islands are just in the middle of the North Pacific, gloomy weather, basically picture England on steroids. He flew in some of the worst weather anybody can imagine. And he was supporting ground troops on Attu, which was one of the Aleutian Islands occupied by the Japanese in 42. And unfortunately, while supporting those ground troops, he was flying in some bad weather, which was just a given. And he ended up crashing into a hillside and being killed. And he wasn't brought back home until after the war in 1948, though. Just about imagine after reading that diary, it just was like makes it sad.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not a number. It's not a happy ending.
No.
And again, it's like you just said, it's not a number. These are real pilots, real families that were affected by the losses of these men and women.
Right. Well, and it's just he had that tenacity where it's like I'm serving my country. And it's just with the times when you read it, just take note that wound of Pearl Harbor is really fresh with all these people. There's nothing like overly hatred. There's no over hatred in it, but just pay attention when you guys read these, wartime contemporary accounts, that, there's going to be some colorful language,
Yes,
some things that are pretty dated, but just know that's just how the public feel is. I mean, we as a society right now talk the same way. People 30, 40, 50 years ago are going to think, wow, they talked like cavemen back then. But
and then, it hasn't changed. We said the same terrible things about our enemies and people that we thought, were aligned with our enemies after Pearl Harbor. And we said the same things after the September 11th attacks.
Yep.
And
it's all shifting.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty much the bio on Register. So now we'll talk a little bit about the two squadrons, VF3 and VF6. Again, they're a little confusing. Navy
Please
squadrons.
Elaborate. Yeah.
Navy squadrons are really confusing.
That's why I always focus on Air Force, just because it's a little easier to understand.
We'll get you to come around.
Yeah.
They could teach a college level class on this.
I'll be a TA for that one any day.
Yeah, so we have VF6 and VF6. Pretty confusing, right?
Sounds like the same squadron.
So one was VF3. So we're going to talk about VF3, Fighting Squadron 3. This is the oldest of the two. So for all intents and purposes, VF3 turned into VF6 after 1943. So I'm just going to call it VF3 for today, and to avoid confusion for you guys. But it did swap names a lot. It's very chaotic. So VF3 was formed on September 23rd, 1921, one of the earliest squadrons, Squadron 3. So, and it was called Combat Squadron 4 aboard the USS Langley. And it was equipped with Vought V7 trainers, and they also used as fighters. They were designed during World War I as just kind of a supplement to trainers. We haven't released the standard video yet on our YouTube channel, but the standard was a supplement to the Jenny. This was another supplement to the Jenny.
Oh, God.
And a lesser known one. So they only built, according to my research, a little under 130 aircraft. But the Navy used them, and it actually was it was the first aircraft to take off from a U.S. aircraft carrier, and that's the USS Langley CV-1, which by World War II was long phased out as an active carrier, more used as a transport. And then here comes the confusing part. In 1927, it was redesignated, you guessed it, VF6, equipped with Vought FU-1s, and they sprinkled those around. So they're equipped on battleships and destroyers as catapult-based float fighters. Pretty cool. And then the rest of them were based at North Island, NAS North Island. Yep. So getting into some Top Gun territory. Get the music going.
Can you imagine Top Gun in 1926?
We could make an adaptation. I'd watch it. I don't know about many others.
Maverick's great grandfather. Yes. Maybe not that.
Everybody's talking fast. Yeah, and then 1930 to 31, went back aboard Langley, flying with Boeing F-2Bs and F-3Bs, which were biplane fighters that later evolved into the F-4B, which was also Army-designated P-12, some a little bit more well-known fighter than the F-3B and F-2B. Somewhere in 1937, they were redesignated VF-3 aboard the Saratoga, Lexington, and Yorktown. They all transferred around.
And to clear up,
go ahead. Yeah.
To clear up any confusion, we're talking the first Saratoga.
Yes, the original Saratoga.
Gotcha.
Yep. And that survived the whole war.
It did, yes, and it was sunk during the atomic test. I only know a little bit about the Saratoga because my uncle served on the other Saratoga,
the new one,
the newer one, which unfortunately was also scrapped. But sorry.
And we're talking about the early carriers. So when I'm talking the Saratoga, Lexington, Yorktown, the first iteration. So like CV2 for Lexington, CV3 for Yorktown.
Early numbers.
Yep. So the Lexington and Yorktown both got sank during World War II, but they were equipped with F3F flying barrels in 1937. So the predecessor to the F4F, which it later was equipped with early on in the 40s, equipped with F4 F3s and F4 F4s. The difference between the two, the F4 F3 didn't have folding wings. There was an example at Oshkosh last year, which is really cool. We'll talk about that in a sec. But it was disbanded in 1945. A few of their notable members were Butch O'Hare, John Thatch, which are a couple of the two.
Yeah,
those are the two.
I don't think there's a single, maybe not normie, if I'm allowed to use that word, but I think anyone that calls himself a World War II buff should know definitely Butch O'Hare.
Yep, and the Thatch weave, the maneuver that
absolutely
was really put to the test at Midway. But yep, so those are some notable members, and they were aboard those carriers pre-Midway. And then the squadron was disbanded in 45, and there's no record of it coming back as a new iteration or anything like that. So that was the original squadron. He was posted to VF3. We're going to call it VF3. It was later renamed VF6 post 1943. So then we have VF6, like pre-1943 VF6, which was established in 1935 as VF1B. And they were equipped with Boeing F4Bs. So that biplane fighter P-12 Army variant, if you're familiar. Then in 1937, things got normal, and it was redesignated VF6. So they were equipped with F3Fs up until they later were phased out, and the F3Fs later, to get on a tangent here, were brought into the training role around 1940.
The Wildcats.
Yeah, and then they were turned in F4F Wildcat.
Excuse me.
Yep. So then they were re-equipped with F4F Wildcats later on with the -3 and -4 variants, just like VF3 was. During Guadalcanal, they were served aboard the USS Enterprise, and that's where we'll see, we would see Register flying off the Enterprise until it got hit and had to return back to Pearl Harbor to get repairs.
Do you know how long they were in Guadalcanal?
They were there for the first month and a half, 2 months.
And then it got torpedoed?
Yep, and he transferred to a couple of different carriers. In his diary, he's aboard the Wasp before that got sank late in August.
It's a big name.
The USS Wasp. He was aboard the Saratoga a little bit as well, just to kind of go back. He was very biased to the Big E because it was the newest of the ships, and it was the nicest. Yep. And then some notable actions for this group. The VF6 served at Midway prior, and then took part a lot in the battles, Eastern Solomons battles, like Guadalcanal. Served in Formosa, Okinawa later in the war.
Oh wow!
Yep. And
they were in Okinawa.
Yeah, after they were equipped with F6F. So another interesting thing that stuck out for me was he was really looking forward to the addition of F6F Hellcats. They were in the testing phase. They weren't quite in combat yet in 42, so he was very excited for that. But yeah, and then post-war they're redesignated as VF31, which still exists now as VFA31, and they're currently equipped with FA-18E Super Hornets.
Awesome.
So
it's cool that at least one of his squadrons is still actively flying today.
Yeah, and if we can get anybody from the 31 squadron, that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, that's Francis Register. Really cool story. Unfortunately, didn't make it through the war. But 7 confirmed kills, 1 probable, and a damage to claim. And
the first
true ace from North Dakota.
That's awesome.
And yeah, just a cool background with some really neat stories. And go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and there's no Wildcat or any of his aircraft existing.
You can find Wildcats sprinkled around. I mean, at the O'Hare Airport, you can find an F4F Wildcat.
So that O'Hare Wildcat is in marking similar to his?
It's more Coral Sea marking. So he flew aircraft like that prior. Guadalcanal, they got rid of the meatball and the striped tail.
Okay.
You could probably find one at Pensacola marked like this. I can't tell you where one marks exactly right is. I didn't quite get that deep into the research, but there are plenty of Wildcats out there if you're wanting to look for one similar to what he flew, you're going to want to look for the -3 and -4 variants, not the General Motors FM2s. Getting a little nerdy here, but the FM2 has a more narrow tail and it's taller.
Eat your heart out, airplane enthusiasts.
Yeah, if you ever want to talk shop, I'm open.
Absolutely.
But yeah, this was a fun one. I really enjoyed researching it.
Yeah, Register is one of those, I think in the last episode, Scrappy Bloomer is famous for his ace in a day.
Mm.
And, that's, United States Air Force or Army Air Force wide. Like that was the fastest. So that's what I feel like put him on the map. But with Register, like you said, he was just a guy that signed up, joined the Navy and got his wings,
and
like any other naval.
He was an eager guy, wanted to get in combat, didn't really say no, put his head down. Sounds like a true, like that's how a lot of the work ethic is around here in North Dakota. You get out into the farms, the rural areas, everybody's just put your head down and get to work. And it's just,
there's no room for,
he's a North Dakotan. Yeah. So,
that really kind of hits home. I'm not from North Dakota, but it hits.
You're Midwest. You're close enough.
I've spent 8
honorary
years of my
North
life
Dakotan.
in this town.
Yeah, you're legal resident, right? So
I hope Fargo counts this country.
Yeah, so we thank you guys for tuning in. I guess by this time I'll have been in Canada. We recorded 2 of these episodes in one day just to kind of keep them rolling out, but we'll be covering 7 more. We have a couple interesting ones. Well, they're all interesting, but we got a couple
they're all
really
interesting.
Weird. Got a couple weird ones.
There's a few that I'm very much looking forward to. I think next episode we're going to be talking about Sam, your trip up to Canada, seeing
hopefully about that museum there, the Canadian Military Museum.
Yeah, so. And I mentioned this I think in 2 episodes ago, but I'll be in Colorado at the end of August. So if there's anything I should see or do while I'm out there, please leave a comment. We read them all. We appreciate them all. And we appreciate you guys for tuning in. So with that being said, Sam, do you have anything else?
No, just kind of piggybacking on what you said there. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate all the feedback we get. I mean, really, we're not doing this for profit or anything.
Get a dime.
We don't get a dime. We spend a lot of money, but we're not looking for anything like that. We just enjoy the conversation.
Exactly.
We get to talk to some really cool people, dive into some really, really cool information, and it's just a privilege.
And I think at the end of the day, sharing the stories of these guys is, I think, the most rewarding thing we can do. Because none of them, I don't think any of the aces are left.
No.
And it's just, sharing their stories with you guys is awesome. So we'll leave it at that. We'll see you next week. And take it easy, guys.
Thank you. See ya.